This clip is from The Buckle Bomb Show. New episodes drop every Sunday at youtube.com/bombmediaproductions. Triple H announcing his retirement from in-ring competition. He was on Stephen A. Smith's show on ESPN Plus. Stephen A's World had an interview with him. Went through a lot in this interview. His retirement, the seriousness of his cardiac event. You know, there weren't a lot of details about it. It was just this vague cardiac event that we all knew about. But he'd obviously been out of the spotlight for a while. Did you watch this interview? Did you? What are your thoughts on it and his legacy in the world of wrestling?
To me, this was one of the very few times where you got to see Triple H open up about his candid private life outside of the ring. Couldn't imagine the fear that Stephanie or his children had when you go through something like that, or the fear that he was feeling. So I could imagine that would put a lot of things into perspective about where you're going next with your life and your career. And let's face it, man, unfortunately, you just had the passing of Scott Hall. I'm sure that opened some things up for him too. So, it's going to be a little weird not seeing that Triple H entrance every WrestleMania from now on. But, you can say the same thing with The Undertaker right now as well.
Well, sure, and time is undefeated in that way. There's always going to be an ending for everything. But it's certainly, when you heard him talk about his daughters and you see him get choked up, like that was. It's always very interesting when we have these larger than life personas that we grow up watching, and then something happens or whatever, and you get to see a little bit of the real human being behind, that big personality that we're used to seeing, and it's always a little shocking and a little sobering in this case, especially. But to hear him go through, from the fluid in his lungs that ended up screwing up his heart somehow, and him going through that whole story and just everything that's happened. Glad to hear that he's still been in the office and he's still been working hard and he's still dedicated to finding, the next big talent and all that. But obviously his in-ring career, and he said it, he's got a defibrillator right now in his chest. It'd be bad to get shocked on live TV. But we'll segue into a little bit. We'll talk about the legacy of Paul Levesque, of Triple H, both in the ring and outside of the ring in more recent years. Tell me at least your history as a fan of Triple H.
So my history of a fan of Triple H, I wasn't so much of a. Let me rephrase that. I wasn't old enough to really remember Terrorizing, which was his character in WCW in the early 90s. But I do remember when they started airing the vignettes for Hunter Hearst Helmsley, the blue blood from Connecticut. Originally you just think he's this pompous asshole. And then eventually, he forms Degeneration X, Monday Night Wars. Then you go into the corporation, the corporate ministry, the two-man power trip. There was so much in this life of professional wrestling that Triple H was a huge part of, that it's really hard to just ignore the kind of impact he actually had on the wrestling industry. And I hope he can continue that being in the office.
Yeah, he when I first started watching Triple H, like I mentioned to you last week, I got a little bit, even though I'm older than you, I got a little bit of a later start in wrestling. And I didn't really start watching until very early 98, maybe late 97. And I was watching WCW. I wasn't even aware that there was a whole different company. So it probably wasn't until somewhere probably mid 98, I realized there was a WWF as well. But I didn't care to watch it too much. I didn't know anyone that was on it. I was big into the NWO angle that was going on Nitro every week. and Thunder. And but I would watch on Saturday and Sunday mornings. There was Saturday on Livewire at 10 o'clock on USA, and then Sunday was Superstars, and it was usually hosted by Michael Cole, and it was just a clip show of things that they went through that week, maybe a couple of matches, particularly on Superstars, and I was kind of a goody two shoes kid. I didn't curse. I didn't do any of that. So at that point, WWF was full on into their Attitude era. DX doing their silly shit. So I would watch Livewire and Superstars on the weekends in the morning, and they would cut to these clips of DX doing their over the top sexual innuendo and all this shtick. And I went, oh, that's horrible. That's gross. Why would anyone want to watch that? Me being the good kid that I was, I'll stick with WCW. It's way better anyway. But that was sort of my first, impression of Triple H. But of course, eventually, WWF just had a better product, especially going into '99. And eventually, I started watching more of it. Became a huge fan of The Rock, and his feud with The Rock through '99 and 2000, them going back and forth with the title and the matches, and with Chris Jericho as well.
Oh yeah.
One of my favorite WWF Raw moments ever is I think it was in 2000 or 2001 when Chris Jericho had that match early on Raw with Triple H for the title, and Chris Jericho wins. And I'm like, oh my God. And it was a fast count by Hebner a little bit because Hebner had just gotten shoved and berated by Triple H. And that ended up being the reason to reverse the decision. But it was this moment where you get this, and Jericho was over. He may not have been over because he was a WCW guy in the locker room at that time. There was some heat there, according to people. But he was over with the crowd for sure at that point as a babyface. And got the biggest pop for pinning Triple H for the world title at that moment. And I think that's really the moment where people went, oh, Chris Jericho, he could be somebody in this business. Some people, higher up in the WWF at the time when they saw that reaction. So that's one of my favorite moments of all time in wrestling is that moment with Triple H. And then, of course, through the years, I fell out of wrestling a little bit. A lot of his run with John Cena and Sheamus and some of the other things he did. I kind of started to fade away with Evolution, but what a great stable that was, and that was a lot of that was him. And then, of course, you come to later day when I got back into wrestling. There's a whole lot of stuff about him and CM Punk and all that, but it did create some good TV and some good promos in the ring. We can always discuss maybe who should have won that match in WWE's version of the Summer of Punk. It probably should have been Punk rather than Triple H, but it is what it is. It was still some good TV and a good match. But then you transition in, or not to mention his the end of an era match with the Undertaker.
Oh my God,
that was fantastic. That was my first WrestleMania back was WrestleMania 28 that I'd watched. You had CM Punk, I was a big fan of and following, that got me back into wrestling. Him and Jericho, and then the end of an era Hell in a Cell match with Triple H and Undertaker, and I went, what a match with Shawn Michaels refereeing. Classic,
that whole
amazing stuff.
To me, that whole saga that between those three guys, Triple H, HBK, and Undertaker, went back and forth for a couple manias there, and for what my opinion's worth, is some of the greatest series of matches over a WrestleMania, specifically in those guys' lives. I mean, just the story top to bottom, it's on the same level as the HBK I'm sorry, I love you super kick, in my opinion.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. And then of course, his behind the scenes role. We all know how much he's had a hand in building up NXT. We can, the whole 2.0 stuff is another discussion. But, being such a force for good in some of these wrestlers' developments and the talent that he's helped to cultivate. That has some of them have gone on to AEW, but they've all gone on and done some things in wrestling, and a big part of that is him. And I think that might end up at the end of the day, despite all the championships and all the things he's done in the ring. That at the end of the day, he's still got more work to do there. God willing, says the atheist.
Yeah,
I think that'll be
personally.
his. I think that'll be his biggest legacy at the end of the
Yeah,
day in the wrestling business for Paul Levesque will be
originally,
training the guys.
yeah, originally, when NXT started as what we knew it, before 2.0, I'll be the first to admit that originally I was like, oh yeah, let's watch, on a Wednesday night, WWE of Honor is what I used to call it, because it was, you had everyone coming in from ROH or New Japan, but damn it, at the end of the day, after Triple H let these kids sit underneath the learning tree that is Paul Levesque, you forget all about that because it completely builds an entirely new legacy for these people. For example, when Kevin Owens first came to NXT, I had a hell of a time not saying Kevin Steen because that's what I knew him as for years. Yeah. And then, the story between him and Sami Zayn, and then going on and up through the main roster. I believe he appeared with the NXT title to challenge John Cena for the U.S. Championship. I believe that was the story that they had going on there.
I mean, so.
all that from my understanding was Triple H pitching these ideas and giving them the creative freedom to actually run with it. And like you said, that is without a doubt, and going forward, because hopefully there's a lot more of him to give in that regard, going to be Paul Levesque's greatest legacy.